Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Sufyan, Senior Product Manager at ValueLink Connect. First of all, thank you so much for the incredible response to session one. Nearly 2,000 of you joined us live, and we have received some fantastic feedback. We are thrilled to have so many engaged appraisers here, and if today is your first session, we're glad you made it. On behalf of Team ValueLink, I would like to welcome you to our second series of UAD 3.6 training. This series is designed specifically for appraisers on Connect because we believe you deserve the right tools and the right training in order to stay ahead as UAD 3.6 rolls out this fall. In today's session, Josh will walk you through the sales comparison grid, cost and income approaches, and how reconciliation is changing, including what's staying, what's going, and how narrative sections are evolving. Please use the Q&A section to send in your questions. We'll tackle the top voted ones at the very end. One last thing, if you're heading to Valuation Expo next month, be sure to scan the QR code on your screen right now to book a time to meet with us in person. That's all from my side. Thank you again for participating, and now I'll hand it over to Josh to get us started.
Thanks very much, Sufyan. I appreciate it. And let's get moving into our session two. Yeah, so we'll briefly touch on what we looked at in session one. If you didn't join us, just a little bit about me. Walitt Solutions is a consulting company, and we provide education and training and policies and procedures and investigation support and really a lot of different puzzle pieces depending on what our clients need in the valuation, compliance, and regulatory spaces. So as you can see on the screen, just a little bit about me. I won't go over all of that, but feel free to always reach out to me on LinkedIn, or if you do attend industry conferences, always happy to meet folks there. Quick reminder, I am not here representing any sort of board or organization or coalition, any particular company, anything like that. I am representing myself, and I am not here providing any sort of legal advice in any way. So let's take a look at our 4-session series. All right. So for the first part, our last session that we had, the first session that we had, was really an overview, taking a look at the redesign, just taking a peek at some of the reference materials that we have out there, and really getting an idea of a lot of the changes, the clusters of information where we have the text and the data and the narrative and the photos and the exhibits and the graphs all together if it relates to the same topic, where we had the column and row layouts for certain types of information in the report, how we have sections and subsections and things like this. So if you didn't take a look at that, all of these are being recorded, of course, and you'll be able to rewatch any of these at any time. Today, what we're going to really zero in on, as you heard from Sufyan, is we will look at the sales comparison approach, cost approach, and income approach sections. And I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised that appraisers have the opportunity to present those approaches properly representing the methods that were employed. And so I'll plant a seed. We'll talk about depreciation of different buildings, right? We'll talk about opinion of site value. We'll talk about justifying your GRM, supporting the market rent, and things like this that you really don't have the opportunity to present in any formalized way in the current typewriter forms. But in the new report format, you will have the ability to present the methods that you employed and present them properly so someone understands what it is that you did, and not have to go to some sort of paragraph explaining how the form doesn't really work for it. So the third session, we will take a look at data requirements related to various sections. We'll then zero in more on some of the specific sections. And the final session, we will take a look at certifications the disclosures, the scope that's printed, and so on and so forth. We'll take a final look at those reference materials, and then we will also touch on the updated update report and the updated completion report, because what we're really focusing on mainly in this series is the new URAR. So today, again, we'll take a look at sales comparison, cost, and income. We will also take a look at the reconciliation. And then you notice we're not going to take a look at the general text addenda, because there is no general text addendum. There is commentary in every section and most or many subsections. So you can actually address what you need to address where it is handled in the report. All right, so that's really what we're going to be talking about. So what are we not talking about? Well, we're not talking about specific software, because each provider is logically going to have different user experiences. Maybe one software provider solves something through a drop-down, another software provider solves it with radio buttons or checkboxes or something like that, right? So there might be different ways of attacking it. It might be organized differently. It might look different to that, again, user experience. We really can't dive into the various software options that you're going to have out there. I would really encourage you to sort of shop around and see how yours may be changing. All right, we're not talking about methods and techniques. How do I opine to value of the site opinion, site value opinion? How do I conduct highest and best use? How do I estimate these adjustments that we're putting on the grid? That's really a CE class on methods and techniques, right? That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the new report format. And we're also not looking at policy and manuals, policy guides, and things like this, selling guide, HUD handbook 4000.1, right? This is focusing on the reporting of our appraisal, not necessarily what is the required scope of work for X, Y, and Z type of assignment. That would be a separate topic, all right? So let's take a look. Will I see examples of the approaches to value? Yes, you will see examples. We'll see them on the slide. We'll also go to the report samples and take a look at those, sort of being able to scroll around. Maybe we can look at a few pages at once. You can get a real feel for how the layout is going to be. And we will also touch again on the reference materials that we looked at last time. I know I had some folks commenting to me outside of the webinar that I was calling Appendix F1 your friend, F for friend. And I think that's a really good way of remembering that we have an excellent reference guide provided for us. So let's start with the sales comparison approach. All right, so we do have some rows in the sales comparison approach that are required. They're required. All right. We also have some rows that are optional, meaning the appraiser determines whether or not this particular item is relevant to include. All right. So again, some are always going to appear in the sales grid. There's no choice. Other times, the appraiser can choose to be incredibly granular about certain items and determine these are relevant for comparison purposes, maybe for adjusting, and they say, I want to include those rows. Other times they say, I don't need to include those rows, so it's optional. And there are different adjustment types in terms of how the layout and format allows, where it allows, when it allows, what type it allows. And we'll take a look at that. You'll understand it probably through the visualization and seeing the example, but we have some that will have no adjustments allowed. Now, it might seem bizarre, but you'll understand as we take a look at that. You have some rows of information that is there for information, and there's no adjustment allowed there. It's either inappropriate or it's being handled in some other place. We also have what are called being referred to as roll-up adjustments. or you might think of them or call them combined adjustments. This is where there's multiple rows of data, but no one's asking for an adjustment on every single line. They're saying, you know what, this all relates together, make one lump adjustment, make one roll-up adjustment for this entire concept here where you have various bits of information. And then, of course, the third type of adjustment that we might discuss in this context is the individual line adjustment. This is the traditional URA that we're used to. On the typewriter forms that we currently use, we have a space for adjusting on every row, and you can throw a number in there, and it takes care of what's on that one particular row. And so we'll see those, of course, in many, many parts of the grid. So how many of you are on social media groups for appraisers and you have heard there's a lot more required fields in the sales comparison approach grid? I imagine some of you have, if you're out there. I know I have seen them. Just remember, Appendix F is your friend. All right. Are there more rows of data in the sales comparison grid? Yes, there are. Are there as many as some on social media are making it out to be? No. Because remember, there's a lot that are optional. And so if you look at some material out on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's websites, you will see some that just have everything built out to show the possibilities and the number of rows that are, that can be used and things, but they're not all required. They're not all going to be relevant, so the appraiser may choose to say, no, I'm not having that show in my report. So just keep that in mind. Some of the things you hear, I like to call myth information or misinformation, but I like the myth. We can bust myths by looking at our resources, and some of our resources are Appendix F. You'll ValueLink as well as Walitt Solutions. We're going to have all of the materials we look at. We're going to have it out on websites, so don't worry about that. But you can also Google Fannie Mae, UAD, Freddie Mac, UAD. You'll get to their websites. You can look up this information. No one's keeping it secret. All right, this is not secret information. But you can go to take a look at the Appendix F1, and you can take a look at Appendix C1 as well. And C1 has what I like to call the impossible report. C1 is sort of the impossible report. In other words, it shows most of the fields that could possibly ever show up in a report, but you'll never have them all in one report. But it has sort of the master layout almost to the best degree you can have that concept. But what's really nice about this is if you scroll through, you can see all these red numbers and you can say, well, what is this? Obviously, this is county. That's pretty easy to figure out. But you could actually say, oh, 3.002, or you could just take a look at the label, and you then can go to Appendix F1 and search for it using your PDF search. Now, mine is Control F. Different PDF viewers will show it differently, but I want you to feel comfortable knowing how to navigate these. All right. So if I wanted to learn about the sales comparison approach, I could go to my F1 and I could just do a search for the sales compara. I could type it all out, but I'm just looking for that string. This is showing revisions to this document and things. I'm going to get through that. We see it's in the table of contents. We could go there and just click there. And matter of fact, that's what I might do just for demo here. We're going to click into the sales comparison approach. And now I'm in section 22, sales comparison approach. So everything I see here that appears on the report, if I'm just going to scroll down real quickly, if we see any code numbers, they're going to start with 22. Here we go. 22 because sales comparison is section 22. You don't need to remember the number. My point is just it's a really well organized document where you're going to see everything about this particular topic, it's going to explain the layout, it's going to explain the fields, and so on and so forth, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a simple example of a sales comparison approach, and we're going to look at one that's a little bit more complex, okay? And it looks like we've got a question, where is Appendix F? So I did answer that question. We've got that off. You can Google Fannie Mae UAD, and you will see all sorts. You will see more information than you ever wanted to know about UAD and the new URAR. Let's take a look. We've got a question. How can you show how the form is filled in real time? That's a software question, right? That's a software question because you're going to fill it in differently depending on the software provider you use. So I can't show that. You'll want to look at demos of your own software provider and kind of shop around, see what you like. How many rows are required? As I go through this, we'll see some of the rows that are required. We're not going to look at every single item, right? But you'll get a feel for the items that always, the rows that always appear, and then we'll also get the flavor in the more complex one where they've had more rows appear, right? So we took a look at this briefly last time. This is right out of Appendix F. Here's a page showing all these different rows, and look at these special rows and how unique they are and different, and this is more than I normally do. Well, actually, of these rows that we see on this screen, site size is the only one that's always required. All right, the blue italics in the Appendix F signifies that it's up to the appraiser, depending on relevance. And this hazard zone here, this is saying it's always required if the subject or comp has any sort of hazard zone noted. And then they do require a comparison to say, okay, well, if one of these properties is in a hazard zone, we want to know about all the others as well. So it's required if, so it's still contingent and it won't appear in every report. All right. So just an example of what you have to find in Appendix F. Take a look. You will be surprised at how many are blue italics and how others are just contingent. And you might not be quite as anxious as you would be if you were just reading things out on social media, where folks are maybe posting some misinformation or some misguided guidance. Again, here we have information about windows, functional issues, disaster mitigation, if relevant, if relevant, if relevant, not required. We have heating, always required. So that just gives you kind of a quick example of, there's a lot of information here that's available in the format, but not required, right? I've noticed a number of questions about what happens if my property is out of cell range. You'd have to ask your software provider. I know myself, I've discussed with several at a conference I went to, and some said we have the ability to work offline. Others had different solutions and things. But again, we're not here to discuss certain software. I'm not a software provider. I wouldn't feel comfortable giving you answers from software to software to software. So that's something you'll need to look into. Here's an example of the sales comparison approach. Now, we can see these gray boxes here. This is, of course, going to have a photo. They just don't have the photo in all of the mock-up sample reports that you can find online and that we will make available on our websites. So what's nice is, again, the readability that we talked about in the first session is we see it across all sorts of concepts. So the reader of the report doesn't have to sort of flip back 20 pages to see, well, what did this comp look like? Let me just kind of get a picture in my head. It's right there. Here's a comparable, and here's a comparable. I just took a look at comparable 4 and 5. Here, of course, the subject property is next to it. Obviously, there's a page before this with comps 1, 2, and 3. All right, but you can see some very logical information here. We don't have these weird abbreviations that it's a C For closed sale, we actually have real English words. Look at that. It's a readable report. Who would think we'd want a readable report for our users, right? They can read and say, oh, this is a settled sale, as opposed to active listing, pending, and so on. What's the sale price? We can make adjustments here. So for seller concessions, the contract date, sale date, is it attached or detached? We don't have days on market jammed in on some other line, right? Now it has its own line. So it just very clearly, so it may sort of extend longer than we might today, or well, obviously today it only has a certain length, but it will expand because things are readable. We have everything having its own row instead of jamming 4 bits of information into one, 1.5-inch field, right? So we have some benefit there. Then we move on to the site information, right? We have view and range, again, readability, right? So conceptually, we're still gathering a lot of the same information. We are gathering some more information, as we'll see as we go through the sessions, but we are gathering mostly the same information. All right, but it's actually spelled out in real English words here, right? And we have the neighborhood names, all right, site size and so on, very logical there. We have the dwellings section, so it's sort of breaking it out more. Again, yes, it takes up more space, but it's just sort of breaking it out in more of a modern, organized look. All right, so in this particular case, forced warm air, natural gas, forced warm air, natural, instead of FWA, right? And then, or whatever type of abbreviation you use in your particular area, right? It has English words. Notice they are taking a look at having, or not taking a look, but they are having the year built in the grid rather than the age. So that's a modified concept there, but it's obviously capturing the same data in the end. All right, bedrooms, bathrooms, where it's 2 full and 1 half, and it's made clear so we don't have any readers saying, what in the world is a 2.1 bathroom, right? So we have a lot better spelling out of and less misunderstanding what it is we're typing. Here, again, this is the more simple layout that the simple example we're looking at. We have the finished area above grade, finished area below grade. We have here quality and condition. This is some extra data. We don't normally evaluate the exterior quality and condition and the interior quality and condition. But what I want to point out to you, especially for those of you who do run into, it's like, well, it has really nice condition on the outside, but I went in and it's not, right? So it is nice to be able to lay that out in a little bit more of an understandable way, but there's no adjustments here. They're not expecting adjustments. I did find a typo on one of their mock-ups or whatever, but if you look at like the 30 mock-up sample reports, you'll see consistently this under comps, you do not adjust for interior and exterior quality and condition. You do, yes, you do adjust on the next section where my laser is pointing in the overall quality and condition, just like we do today. So that's not a change. All right. They're not expecting us to make adjustments for exterior quality, exterior condition, interior quality, and interior condition. They're just saying overall, we want the adjustments like you do for quality today and as you do for condition today. All right. We have some amenities, some simple ones like deck, vehicle storage. Notice the adjustment is on this top line here. See where my laser is at the bottom of the screen? That's a roll-up adjustment. Now, in this particular case, it's not really that important because we only have 1 row of information. But let's say you had 2 sets of vehicle storage. They're saying just adjust it on 1 line. Do it all together. However you calculate it, however you estimate it, however you derive it from your data in the market, put the adjustment on 1 line. Whereas this, you can see, is the traditional, adjust it on the row for that 1 item at a time. Okay, so those are remember how I said there's different types? We have the no adjustment, we have the traditional 1 row at a time adjustment, and then we have the roll-up adjustment, right? Because they didn't want to, say, okay, we're going to organize this really nicely and all the garages and carports can be on different rows, but they didn't want all these weird adjustments there. They said, you know what, just adjust for vehicle storage, right? And then we have the bottom of the grid. So this one probably took, with the extra spaces and sections, this is a pretty simple example. It went maybe over 1 page, maybe 1 1/3 pages, something like that, if that kind of gives you some impression of what we're looking at here. And then we have some re-summing up. You don't have to look at the top of the grid again to figure out some things, right? It's restating the sales price as well as the list price. It's telling us the net adjustments, what's the price per finished area above grade. So we still do have that as sort of a, how should I say, kind of a common indicator that they kept. We also have this comparable weight. Comparable weight. And you know what? I'm wondering, I'm just going to wonder out loud for sake of using this reference guide. I wonder, so I'm going to just go to the top of my document here. I'm going to search for comparable weight. Is anyone else wondering? I know it, but I just want to show you. Anyone else wondering what the choices are for comparable weight field? That's a new field. Let's use our friend F1. All right, and let's take a look at comparable weight. Here we go. Comparable weight, one answer for each comparable. Most, less, or no weight. All right, sometimes we include something for, oh, this is analysis purpose. I'm just demonstrating this, but there's no weight to it. Okay, most and less, we can argue over grammar, and I've gotten into some of those fun conversations with people. Technically, grammatically, you don't have two that would ever be most in any setting. But for these purposes, we're using the word most. If you gave all 3, let's say, sales equal weight, you would say most, most, most. Okay, that's just the way this is. Now, you always have your commentary. This is not trying to get away from an appraiser explaining that reconciliation. You do have the commentary for it. But this is just for quick comparison. Tell me, which did you think were the best? Which did you think gave the least weight? Okay. We also have an optional area. This is optional. Additional properties that were analyzed but not used. They were analyzed but not used. So when you get that listing packet, and maybe you use 1 or 2 as comps, perhaps, maybe there's some you don't use and you want to address it. Or maybe when you're interviewing the homeowner and they say, well, I know the house just across the street, it just sold. And it turns out it sold 3 years ago and it's 4 times the size, or I'm exaggerating, right? But maybe you say, you know what? I'm going to make a comment here that this one sold nearby, but this is the reason it wasn't used. This could also be used in revision requests or reconsiderations of value. You could choose to use that as an organized way of communicating this is why some of these other sales were not used. So I do have here a question. C6 and Q6 is now a number rating. I don't understand that question. We've got, you can see here, Q4, C3. It just says the ratings are, anywhere from 1 to 6, 1 being the highest. So there's still the same rating system. We do have a question, are there new definitions? The definitions are in the back of Appendix F. They are slightly modified, but they conceptually, they remain very, very similar. Pay attention to some nuances there. But in terms of rating exterior and interior, there's not a different set of definitions as opposed to the overall. So it's still you go to one set of definitions. All right. Do we always have to add at least one additional property not used? As I said, that's an optional area, unless, of course, you have a client that says they want you to always do that. Okay. Let's see, is there unlimited space for commentary under the reconciliation? I want to say it's this huge character limit. I don't even remember what it is, but I don't think that anyone's going to run out of space unless they're just pasting in just meaningless boilerplate, which of course is, that's not usually a sign of a good report. Boilerplate that applies is good, but just sort of pasting things in. So I would say taking a look at the specs and information that's provided, I do not suspect that we will run out of space. Because remember, we're typing about site in the site area. We're talking about highest and best use in the highest and best use area. We're talking about sales comparison in the sales comparison. So we don't need that text addenda to be 4 pages long, because you're going to be having the pieces where they belong in the report as they apply. So here's another example. This one's a little bit more complex. Okay. I do see a question, concession adjustments. I mentioned that on the first example, but we see it here as well. Here are the concession adjustments where my laser is. Okay. And we have an example question. How is the value of 350 with most emphasis placed on 4 and 5 with it not even being in the range? First of all, we're looking at examples, folks. All right, these are not real reports. They're plugging things in. And also, we don't know what comps 1, 2, and 3 were in that scenario. So it's kind of hard to say. It may have been most for all 5. But don't get caught up in the specifics in terms of the numbers and the information. We're really looking at the layout here. All right, these are examples. These are mock examples. All right, so very similar here. Now, notice here we have property rights appraised are leasehold. There's going to be contingents. We already saw that. Remember in that excerpt out of Appendix F, we saw it's contingent on. Now, in this particular case, this row appears if it's anything other than the fee simple, and we have ground rent then appearing. So the technical specs dictate when certain rows will appear, and that speaks for the whole report as well. The technical specs dictate when certain fields and sections will appear as well. All right, not just related to the sales comparison. All right, we have the site size here. We have the street type, view, and range, just like we did on the first example. All right, now let's take a look here. We have an optional section, or a contingent section, we could say. We had information to share here on energy efficient and green features, and we have a roll-up adjustment. They're saying, look, we understand you might have various things going on with energy efficiency, but notice there's no place to make an adjustment. This is just informational lines, and the roll-up adjustment is made here. And the same idea, this isn't changing appraisal practice or how we fill out grids. If it's different, a zero adjustment means you looked at the difference, but you believe there's no marketability or value difference. If it's the same, you'd leave it blank. So it's the same kind of thing. Now, here, technically, we could say, well, actually, the home energy score is different. So maybe it still makes sense to put the 0 there. Right? But again, these are mock-ups. We're showing the layout and things like that. Right? How many total pages are there? Okay, so if you attended the first session and this session, we're going to also see how this has expanded quite a bit. This grid is a lot larger than the other one. There's more relevant information. There's more details provided. How long the report will be is based on the complexity of the property and the assignment, right? There will be entire sections like energy efficiency. There's going to be an entire energy efficiency section if there's something to talk about with energy efficiency. If not, that's 0 lines. That's 0 space in your report. So we can't give an answer on total pages. Can't do that. Here we have units. We have a breakdown here right? We have the ADU. So we have the main area, and then we have the ADU. Notice this, we have three comps here. We have adjustments, we have adjustments, we have adjustments. These are just row adjustments like we would normally have, right? When we move down to the exterior and interior quality, just as we did last time, notice we don't have a place for adjusting. This is informational. Remember, the interior and exterior quality and condition, there are no adjustments made. It's on the overall quality and the overall condition, which is just below it. But notice here we have a lot more detail. This has below grade, so there's more lines to appear. All right, here the appraiser has chosen to have additional fields appear in the exterior quality. They want to show they have the same roof for whatever reason in this case. They want to show that they have different, that there's a range of exterior siding here, including aluminum and vinyl. They've chosen to have those rows appear. And a lot more detail on the interior quality and condition. Notice all of these optional rows, they believed it was relevant to include for comparison purposes. No adjustments on the interior and exterior quality and condition. The adjustments come in the overall section where my laser is. In the overall section, that's where comps are adjusted, just like we do today, just like we do the overall adjustments today. All right, and there's that roll-up adjustment for vehicle storage. We have outbuildings. Right, you can see this report's probably longer, right? Because the sales comparison approach looks like it's going to be probably twice as long, right? How many of you ever want to include information about the outbuilding, but it's so impossible, right? This way it puts it right here, rather than someone having to look 3 or 4 places at the sketch, and then over to here in the text area, and then over here in the, it's laid out right there. All right, again, we have comparable weight. Here's just another, remember we're on a second example. And then, of course, reconciliation there of the sales comparison approach. All right, we're going to move off the sales comparison approach. That's our overview. That's our overview. All right, here's the cost approach. Let's take a look at it. Much clearer breakdown of the components that contribute into the indicated value in that section. We have structure-specific depreciation, so we can actually show the methods we used correctly and present them correctly instead of somehow throwing them all into one line and somehow calculating it properly. We do cite the depreciation method. We do cite the site valuation method, and we will cite the cost method. And there's a section for support of your site value opinion, more than just the three lines that we have now. Okay. So if we were to take a look at this, this is that nice little breakdown. At the top of the cost approach, it basically says, hey, if you look below, you're going to see support and explanation for all of these components that led to my cost approach indicated value. Here's the first section here. There's a dwelling. You can see we can apply depreciation. Evidently, maybe it's a new manufactured house. In this particular case, if it's manufactured house, it gives a line for the delivery, installation, and setup, which is very typical to account for in manufactured house properties. We have remaining economic life, effective age, some commentary on that. We have then separate depreciation for the outbuildings, as you can see on the bottom. All right, so we have 154,000 for the dwelling. We see that out here in that summary we just looked at the top of the cost approach. We have these contributing to the outbuildings we looked at. And then we have as is site improvements also. And if we are opining to site value using a sales comparison, for example, let's say we have vacant land sales that we're using. If we choose that option there, rather than allocation or extraction or other, which are the other choices, and I know that from reading Appendix F1, then it gives us a very simple grid. And actually, I've seen appraisal reports that just do this. They copy and paste information into a nice little grid on their text agenda. Well, it's right there for you now. All right, and then of course some reconciliation for that site value. If you used allocation or extraction, you would have that space to type as well. All right, you just wouldn't have the sales grid for vacant land sales. All right, and then finally, the bottom, some of the very common information that you would expect. We do have a field for what's your depreciation method, what's the cost method. Usually if you take a look at your source, in this example they say Marshall and Swift, depending on your data source, you'll know what your cost method is. If not, go back at reference materials to figure out, is this comparative unit? Is this one of these other types of methods? And there's your cost approach commentary. Just a reminder, this is what we're looking at right now. Right? It doesn't really, and granted, there's some other space too for some sentences, but it really doesn't allow us to explain the method. It really doesn't allow us to show what is it that I did, right? So no more plus or minus. Do we have to type the parentheses? That's a software question. Whether you have to type the parentheses or whether just typing negative will then format it for you. I would imagine if I were designing software, I would make sure it does it for the user, but you'll have to ask your software provider about the user experience. I hate to imagine what underwriters and reviewers are going to do with this. I don't really know what you're getting at there. I would say what they're, I mean, honest, I would imagine what they're going to do with it is be able to read it better. I mean, to be totally frank, and I don't think that's what you were getting at by the nature of your comment, but if you have something that's well organized and laid out and section by section it has all this, I would be willing to bet people are going to be able to read it better. But again, I don't know exactly what you were getting at. If you inspect more than the required comps, those extra comps, do they have to be shown? Is there a number limited of comps? There's not a number limit for comps. Do they have to be shown? Again, properties analyzed but not included as comps is an optional section. So unless your client's asking you to include, hey, what other sales did you consider? That's an optional section. So just because you looked at some other sales or considered other sales, it's an optional section. All right. Let's move on to rental information and income and the income approach. I want to make sure we cover what we, all the sections we're covering here, we want to cover here. So we actually have a grid for comparable rental units, and the appraiser decides when to include the rent schedule or has control over that. Again, if let's say your client requires it, well, of course, the appraiser is going to choose to include it, right? And then also which subject units to include. You might actually only be including one in your rental information analysis. So it gives a lot of flexibility there. All right. And then there's also support for your GRM. All right. So here's an example of the report in the background here. It's asking for certain information about each unit, the actual rent. Underneath this, we actually set this up a little bit. It doesn't show both here, but you'll actually see the market rent in a similar format on the right. And then you can see here is our rental analysis, subject unit 1. Off to the right would be subject unit 2, and then below if there was a subject unit 3, and so on. So notice in the rental analysis, the rent study, it's all qualitative. There's no numerical adjustments spaces. And yeah, so sorry about that. We have that one stuck in the front, but here's just some where the photos will appear for each of the rental comps. All right, so we're just showing different portions of it. All right, and then the income approach, we have the gross rent multiplier comparable section. So what we have now is literally at the very bottom of your screen. That equation is all we have right now with the income approach. But you can see we can actually demonstrate how did I come up with the market rent for the subject if that's part of the assignment. And then in the actual income approach under gross rent multipliers, we can show what did I look at in terms of the sales of rental properties to base my gross rent multiplier on. And you can see where these are the indicated gross rent multipliers for the comps, and then reconciled here, and there is a commentary section there as well. Reconciliation. Reconciliation, we sum up the values from our approaches. We have a special spot for the reasons for exclusion. Appraisal summary, just kind of restating some of the key aspects. And any sort of additional values that the client requested. For example, do they want a liquidation sale value? Do they want an as repaired value? And you had prepared the as is in the main area of the form, and so on. So it accommodates these other lending activities that aren't necessarily mortgage and refinance, to where maybe you're developing an as is and as repaired for a fix and flip, that type of thing. And then it also restates all the defects, damages, and deficiencies from throughout your report. So remember, we talked about there is an executive summary page at the very beginning. It restates all of the subject to inspection and repair items. Those appear throughout the report, and then they also reappear here in the reconciliation section. You don't have to type them 3 times. They just, once they're entered, it populates in all 3 areas. So you can see the summary section, very simple concept. It restates the contract price if there's a contract. We have a field now for the reasonable exposure time, so very standard friendly for USPAP compliance. All right, this condition statement is an automatic statement. This first arrow is an automatic statement. I've made it subject to inspection and subject to repair. And so we literally just have a standardized language here that says, in this case, it's subject to the required inspections, and it then makes a second part of the sentence since you have 2 conditions there, and it's subject to the repairs. And it also has that this might have affected assignment results, which is a USPAP required statement. All right, you have free-form text here for the reconciliation. You have some automatic language populating. You have the restating of the repairs and inspections required from throughout your report. Some automatic language at the very bottom, and we have what is the current condition before repairs and so on. All right, because sometimes that's important for lenders in terms of, hey, are we doing escrow? Are we doing XYZ, right? And we've got, I feel like I'm in my calculus class. I sure hope not, because I don't see calculus here, or geometry, or algebra even. But it's a change in format. There are new fields. I would have every confidence that most appraisers can take a look at it, whereas I don't think I'd be very confident with calculus. All right. We also have revision history and a reconsiderations of value section that can be implemented in that revision history. All right, so again, I might explain it at the end of my text addenda, what changes I made for a revision. You might put it at the top of your text addenda. Others might add an extra page to the end of the report and explain it. This is the same place for everybody, so it's a little bit easier for folks to really understand what is it that was done, where should I be looking throughout the report for these changes that were made. So in this particular case, they made some changes on March 15th. It looks like 2 changes on that day. One was at the sales comparison approach, one was at the reconciliation, and of course the description will be assignment specific as those situations come up. If there was a reconsideration of value, we can sum it up there and address it there. So no one's wondering, where, XYZ went. And remember, we could also refer them to the properties analyzed but not included as comp section if, as a result of reconsideration, we thought, let me spell it out property by property and address why I didn't include them or why I've now decided to include this one or something like that. Okay, so kind of a more formalized area for most everything we could think of, right? Let me take a look. We have a question. Is this where we explain why or why not concession adjustments are made or not made? So you would explain why you do or do not include concession adjustments within your sales grid, or excuse me, in your commentary section. So this is the report here. We're in an exhibit of D1, D like dog 1. And there's probably, I'm just off the top of my head saying there's probably 30 example reports out there. We're looking at this particular one, and here is concessions. All right. And we get to the bottom of the grid. This is that complex one. So this one actually extended, it looks like, about 2 pages because it had an ADU, it had 2 or 3 outbuildings. They chose to expand a lot to show the quality and condition factors, interior and exterior. Those are not required. This is where you explain what's going on with your sales comparison approach. So that's where you would explain concession adjustments. It's where you would explain your other adjustments as well. There's not a field for explaining, GLA adjust or, above grade adjustment, below grade adjustment, view adjustment. There's not separate commentary sections. There's a commentary section for the sales comparison approach. So I hope that's clear. And then the question says also where and how adjustments are derived. That's in your sales comparison approach commentary. That's where you would do that. You can also, if you needed to, you could attach exhibits if there was some sort of image that you're using of some Excel or some chart or something like that. You could do that as well. But this wouldn't change, that you type about things. You're going to include commentary. You're going to include commentary like you normally do. Will you be able to do short-term Airbnb rental analysis? That would be really up to the guides and handbooks in terms of policy. We're showing what can you do on the forms if this particular report format is suitable for a certain type of assignment, then go for it. If it's not suitable for it, look for an alternative in your software in terms of laying out a process for short-term or Airbnb rental analysis. All right. Let's take a look. I just want to make sure I'm handling some questions that are coming through. Is the revision history section auto-populated? So you have to describe what you did. So this is all going to be you here. The changes that you're making, things like that, that's totally in your control. Okay. You can choose, which section and so on, but it's not going. It's really a formatting change there. I wouldn't say conceptually it's going to be different. You would still explain what you're doing. Okay. We have not looked at the market area, so market section of the report, I should say. We haven't looked through the entire reports, have we? All right, we've looked at conceptually some things. We did look at, in session 1, the market section. So today we've looked at the approaches to value and the reconciliation. We have a question about where's the 1004 MC section. Well, there is no 1004 MC section. There is a market section, and you'll see it in session 1. We went over that in session 1. So take a look at that. You can also take a look at it in mock-up report examples. So for example, if we were to go to the beginning, and let's say you say, hey, I don't know where to find things, but I want to just search for it. So let me look for market. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of words there, but let's see if we can see one that shows up in a black tab. We could do that type of thing, and we could get to our market analysis area. All right, so that's one way. The other way would just be to take a look at session 1, and we covered that as well. What if the sales on the market multiple times before it's sold? Is there a cumulative days on market area? That's one of those things so there's not a separate line for days on market versus cumulative days on market. That would be a question of taking a look at policy of, okay, is the in the mortgage space with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA, and so on, do they expect days on market to be cumulative, or do they expect days on market to simply represent the latest listing only? And that would be sort of outside what we're looking at here, but you would check to see what's expected of us. So that would not necessarily be in this in terms of the format of it. But what you could do is you could, that's income approach. Let's go to, actually, you know what? Let me just open up this report and go to the sales comparison approach. Let's go to the sales comparison approach. Here's the market section that I was just referring to. Remember, we looked at that in session 1, so that replaces any sort of MC type item. And if we were to go to the sales comparison approach, we're going to see days on market. All right. If you are including days on market or combined days on market here, you could either add another row at the bottom of your grid, or you could talk about it in commentary. If you're required to put one, but you believe the other has meaning, include it. Nothing in the report format is to keep an appraiser from disclosing what they need to disclose or analyzing what they need to analyze. Where can we find session 1? My understanding is that ValueLink will have all of them available online, and Walitt Solutions also, my company, we will have it online at the conclusion of the series, I believe, but we may be getting some of the videos set up in the 3 or 4 days in between. But you'd find it in really just the same companies. All right. Let's take a look at some other questions. I'm going to just quickly go through, catch up on the slides here because I did go back. But I do want to focus on questions at this point. Okay, where would you input charts and data regarding the newer market condition reporting requirements? All right, so that's a good question. So if we go up to the market section, all right, and this is in session 1. It's just as an example. It's a really good example of it. We have the market section. We have some fields we fill in. We have some metrics that we complete. We have some commentary, and we have the exhibits. And that's also demonstrated in session 1, if you want to take a look at that, along with some other examples. And that's the cluster concept that we talked about, right? That's the cluster concept where everything that relates is together, rather than see this, go here, look here, and now you have 3 or 4 places to go to get the whole story, right? Let's take a look. How many land sales can be put in the grid for the site value on the cost approach? I don't know that off the top of my head. I think in the exhibit, the examples that are provided by the GSEs, I think there's 3 and 4, depending on which examples we look at. I would anticipate that there's not a restriction that would keep people from presenting what they examine in terms of their the comps of vacant land sales. Let me look at some other questions here. I've heard not all AMCs are requiring these new forms. Is this correct? So we saw the time frame, the plan for release, right? We have limited production in September of this year. We have open, broad production for more lenders to use in January of 2026. And then we do have a cutoff period where they will not take the old version. This is really going to be lender driven, not AMC driven. So there's going to be a period where you have requests for the 1004 and the 2055 and the this and the that. And then you will also, in that same overlap period, you will get requests for, we need the new URAR for this condo. We need the new URAR for this 3-unit. We need the new URAR for this single family, right? Because there's no more form numbers like we talked about. And so that's lender driven. Has the lender adopted the new format, or do they want it ordered on the old typewriter form? So that's not really, I want to say that's not really AMC driven. That's up to the users, the lender client users. All right. Is there a way to store some basic comments? Like I imagine maybe we're talking about sort of like a template or something. That's a software question. Can you copy and paste data? Software question. I would be surprised if they don't let you paste text into a report, but I don't want to answer that for them because I don't design software. Let's take a look. Will we still be able to add all this information collected in the field when we get back to the office, or do we have to have some sort of app out in the field? There's not an app that is required. Someone could go out with a clipboard and write up all their notes. The app I am recommending to people I talk with, because the risk of missing information is too great. But also, I've used an app for years and years and years, and I'm actually excited to see how will they be tweaked a little bit to gather some of the extra information. Integrates right in. We talked in session 1 about basically you're doing double or more the work if you're not using an app, but there's no requirement to use an app. You're going to want to ask your software provider, hey, if I don't use some sort of inspection app, what does it look like, right? What does it look like in terms of my experience at my desk, and what am I going to do? Are you still going to have to add your license and E&O insurance? That's going to be a policy question for your clients, whether they want your license and E&O attached to the report. There's a section, and again, we're about halfway through our sessions, right? We're in session 2 of 4. We will see that you can upload your license right next to where you say who the appraiser is. You can do the same with E&O insurance and things like that. So that's going to be, how do I do it? Go to your software provider, but there's pretty much a space for everything, is kind of how I take a look at this. Okay, we talked about it the first session. This is not for private work. This is designed for mortgage appraisals. If you use it for other things, just look at what you're saying, because maybe some things are worded incorrectly. Are the 1007 and 216 forms. So the 1007 is the rent schedule. We looked at the rent schedule example where we can show the rented units that we're using to derive our market rent opinion for the subject. 216, the operating, I believe, is what it is, operating expenses. And there's not something built in for operating expenses to my knowledge. Are lenders keenly aware of these changes? Yes. I mean, tomorrow, I believe it is that I'm presenting to lenders with ValueLink. I've taught classes related to this where loan officers and risk people were there from lenders, just trying to understand that. And there's a lot of training opportunities. Um, have them reach out if you have some folks who you think could use the training. Um, Session 3, we've got it advertised online. We've also gone over already what we're going to go over there. How long will this go on? I'm just going over a few minutes because we have so many questions, but I'm not going to require anyone to stay. You don't have to stay. Can this be used for private? Okay, so we went over that in the first session. This is designed for mortgage appraisal work. It might not be appropriate in every case of non-lending. Can you add pages to the report, like plat map, public records? You're going to include it in the section it relates to. So plat map, you attach it in the site section, like we talked about the clusters, right? Public record, if you have something about the subject you need to include, attach it there. If it's related to the sales comparison and it's a comp, attach it there. You have all sorts of ability there. So really good ideas. I like a lot of these questions. All right. I am going to turn it back over to Sufyan. I know we've gone over. There's just a lot of really good questions, so I'm excited that people are asking questions about this. Um, do you have some information to close us out?
Thank you so much, Josh, for yet another informative session. I really enjoyed it, and I'm quite certain our audience feels the same way as well. A lot of participants asked for session recordings, so yes, they will be available on our website at valuelinkconnect.com once all 4 sessions have concluded. So, meanwhile, you can still access each session recording on our Facebook community. You can scan the QR on the screen or directly search us on the Facebook. It's by the name Connect by ValueLink. So, if you feel any of your questions remain unanswered or any topic that wasn't covered during the session, please do post it on the Facebook community and we'll do our best to address them and keep you informed. That would be all from my end, Josh. We look forward to hosting you again for a session 3 on Monday, 4th August, same time, 12 p.m. Central. Once again, thank you so much. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of the week.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.